The morning of March 12, 2004 began like any other morning on Fulton Street in Fresno, California. A modest residential block in the heart of California's Central Valley, where the landscape stretches flat and brown and featureless in every direction under a vast pale sky bleached white by the relentless sun. The air smells of dry dust and distant agricultural fields, the faint sweetness of orange groves, and the dry earthiness of plowed soil carried on a hot, still breeze. The streets are wide and flat and shadeless, the asphalt shimmering faintly in the morning heat. The small wood frame houses sitting behind chain-link fences in yards of brown dry grass, their paint faded and peeling in the California sun. The kind of neighborhood where nobody looks twice at an unremarkable house. The kind of neighborhood that keeps its secrets. The house at the end of Fulton Street was single-story, its exterior paint a faded, dirty beige, its windows covered entirely with dark, heavy curtains that blocked every trace of the bright California morning from reaching the interior. The small front yard was bare brown dirt, not a blade of grass, a few dead weeds pressed flat against the base of the chain-link fence in the dry heat. A cracked concrete path led from the sidewalk to the front door. From the outside, it looked like dozens of other houses on dozens of other Fresno streets. Run down, unremarkable, the kind of house that nobody notices. Inside that dim, curtain-darkened house, on the morning of March 12, 2004, something was about to end. Something that had been building for decades. A system of total control, of daily terror, of a world so completely constructed by one man that the people living inside it had never known anything else existed. A world with its own dark religion, its own handwritten rules, its own particular understanding of God and family and death. A world in which stacks of white coffins sat in the dim living room as ordinary furniture, as unremarkable as a kitchen table. That man was Marcus Wesson. And on that bright, flat, merciless Fresno morning, two young women were about to knock on his door and change everything. Their names were Ruby and Sofina. They were his nieces, young women who had grown up in the darkness inside that house, and others like it, who had been abused inside the world Marcus Wesson had built, who had eventually escaped into the hard white California sunlight outside and discovered, slowly and painfully, what ordinary life looked like. They stood now on the cracked concrete sidewalk outside that peeling house in the morning heat, squinting in the bright light, their shadows sharp and black on the pale pavement. They had come back because their children were still inside. What happened next? In the 90 minutes between that knock on the dark front door and the moment Marcus Wesson emerged from the back of that house with his clothes soaked in blood, would become the worst mass murder in the history of Fresno, California. 9 people dead, 7 of them under the age of 9. Each one shot once, precisely, through the eye. All of them his children. This is the story of Marcus Wesson. A story about what a man can build when he convinces himself and everyone around him that he is God. About 30 years of darkness behind curtained windows, in unremarkable houses, on ordinary American streets. And about the women who finally said enough, and what it cost them. Marcus DeLon Wesson was born on August 22, 1946, in Kansas City, Missouri, in the gray Midwest cold of a post-war American city. Flat streets, brick buildings, the wide brown Missouri River moving slowly at the edge of town. His father was an alcoholic who beat his children and eventually abandoned the family entirely, leaving behind a household shaped by his mother's rigid, fervent Seventh-day Adventist faith. Dark wooden church interiors, serious faces, the particular gravity of people who believe they are living in the last days of the world. He grew up in the dry heat of San Bernardino, California, in the sprawling sun-bleached suburbs of the Inland Empire, where the mountains are always visible on the horizon through the brown haze, and the streets go on forever in every direction. He dropped out of high school. He enlisted in the Army, served from 1966 to 1968 as an ambulance driver, learning, in the blood and mud and screaming noise of Vietnam, an intimate familiarity with the human body and its fragility. He came back to California changed, restless, certain of something he could not yet name. He moved in with a woman named Rosemary Solorio. Rosemary was an older woman with 8 children of her own, a household of dependent people, a ready-made congregation. He made himself indispensable in that dim house, with its cooking smells and its noise, and its children running on the linoleum floors. And he began, quietly, in the particular way of predators who plan carefully and move slowly, to groom the eldest of Rosemary's daughters. Her name was Elizabeth. She was 8 years old when Marcus Wesson first entered her life. She was 14 when he began sexually abusing her in the dark corners of that house. She was 15 when she became pregnant with his child. She is the woman who would remain at his side for the next 30 years. His wife, his victim, the mother of 10 of his children, growing older in the dim interiors of the various houses and boats and compounds. Marcus moved his family through over 3 decades of wandering up and down the California coast and into the Pacific Northwest. Over those 30 years, in the curtained darkness of those various dwellings, Marcus Wesson built his world. He took in 7 of Elizabeth's younger sister's children when that sister said she could not care for them. He began sexually abusing his own daughters and nieces beginning at age 8. Always age 8, always the same age Elizabeth had been. In the dim light of back bedrooms and hidden rooms in the boats, he kept moored along the California coast. 5 of those girls became pregnant with his children. He fathered children with his own daughters. He became, in the most literal biological sense, both father and grandfather to the same small children sleeping on the floors of his houses. He moved the family constantly. A gray fishing boat anchored off the coast of Santa Cruz, a rented house in the flat heat of Fresno, a compound in the green damp of the Pacific Northwest, never staying long enough in one place for anyone outside to look too closely at what was happening within the walls. He kept the children away from public schools, away from doctors, away from the bright, ordinary world outside. He homeschooled them himself, from a handwritten curriculum spread across lined notebook pages in his cramped, elaborate script. And the curriculum was extraordinary. In the dim, candlelit interior of whatever dwelling the family currently occupied, Marcus Wesson taught his children that he was God. Not a representative of God, not a prophet, God himself in human form, present among them in the particular darkness of their shared life. He taught them that Jesus Christ had been a vampire, that drinking blood was the path to eternal life, that the Wesson family existed in a state of divine grace entirely beyond the understanding of the ordinary sinful world outside their curtained windows. He made the children call him Master. He made them call him Lord. He told the girls that it was God's design for them to become his wives. He told them all, repeatedly and explicitly, in the flat, serious voice of a man who believed every word he said, that if the outside world ever came for them, if the people beyond the curtains ever tried to take them away from him, death was preferable to separation. He was not speaking metaphorically. In the dim living room of every house they occupied, stacked against the walls with the casual ordinariness of furniture, sat the Coffins. The house on Fulton Street in Fresno was the latest in that long series of dwellings. A dim, curtain-darkened interior, smelling of cooking and bodies, and the particular closeness of too many people in too few rooms. Religious imagery covered the dark walls, handmade crosses, photographs, pages torn from the handwritten Bible Wesson had composed for his family over the years. On the linoleum floors, children slept on blankets and thin mattresses, eating whatever food was available, living in the total enclosure of their father's invented world. And in the living room, stacked against the walls in the dim, filtered light that leaked through the heavy curtains, were 10 white coffins. 10 white coffins in a living room. Some purchased over the years from funeral homes in the various California cities where the Wessons had lived. Some, investigators would later discover, stolen. All of them present, acknowledged, explained by Marcus to his children as the preparation of righteous people for the inevitable end of things. He had been telling them for years that when the outside world finally came for them, as he had always promised it would, they would die together. The coffins were not a threat. They were a promise. Ruby and Sofina had grown up inside this world, in this darkness, under these white coffins. They had been abused inside it. They had, at some point, found the particular combination of terror and determination that allowed them to push open a door and walk out into the blinding California sunlight outside, into a world that was frightening for entirely different reasons than the ones Marcus had described, but that was real and light and open in a way they had never experienced before. They had not been able to take their children when they fled. In the chaos of escaping, small children left behind in the dim interior of that house. By March 2004, Ruby and Sofina had been outside long enough to understand with terrible clarity what their children were still living inside. They returned. They brought other family members for support. They stood on the cracked, pale concrete of the Fulton Street sidewalk in the hard morning light and knocked on the dark front door. Marcus Wesson came to the door. In the frame of the doorway, the bright California morning behind Ruby and Sofina, and the dim curtained interior behind him, he looked at the women who had escaped his world and understood immediately that the thing he had always predicted had arrived. The outside world had come for his family. He asked them to wait. He shut the dark door. He walked through the dim interior of that house, past the stacked white coffins in the living room, past the dark walls covered in religious imagery, past the rooms where his children had grown up in the enclosed darkness of his world, to the back bedroom at the end of the dim hallway. In that back bedroom, in the low light behind closed curtains, the members of his family had gathered. Small children on the floor. Older children and young adults pressed close together in the tight space. The smell of bodies and fear, and the particular stillness of a room where everyone knows something terrible is about to happen. What happened in that back bedroom in the next few minutes, what the forensic evidence would later reconstruct from the blood patterns on the walls and floors, the position of the bodies, the trajectory of the bullets, was the conclusion of everything Marcus Wesson had been building for 30 years. 9 people shot through the eye with a .22 caliber weapon. The youngest was 18 months old. When Marcus Wesson emerged from the back of that house into the hard white California sunlight of the Fulton Street sidewalk, his clothes were dark and wet with blood. The Fresno police officers who had arrived expecting a child custody dispute looked at the blood soaking his shirt and hands, and the strange absolute calm on his face. The terrible serene calm of a man who believed he had done what God required, and understood immediately that something catastrophic had happened inside. They took him into custody. They went inside. What the first officers through that door found in the dim back bedroom, illuminated now by the cold white beam of police flashlights cutting through the darkness, is described in the subsequent reports in language that still struggles to convey the reality of it. 9 bodies stacked and tangled together on the dark floor of that small room, the walls around them dark with blood, the air heavy with the smell of gunpowder and copper and death, ranging in age from 18 months to 25 years. Each one shot through the eye. Each one a child Marcus Wesson had fathered. Fresno Mayor Jerry Dyer, who was the city's police chief that morning and who walked into that back bedroom after his officers had secured the scene, described it 20 years later in language that had not softened with the passage of time. The worst thing he had ever seen. The worst mass murder in the history of his city. 7 of the 9 victims were under the age of 9 years old. The investigation assembled, with painstaking and horrifying thoroughness, the full picture of what Marcus Wesson had built over 3 decades. DNA testing confirmed what the surviving family members eventually described, that Wesson had raped 2 of his daughters and 3 of his nieces, beginning at age 8, and that 5 of those women had become pregnant with his children. Several of the 9 victims in that back bedroom were, by biology, both his children and his grandchildren. The extent of the incest, revealed through DNA analysis, was described by prosecutors in the cold clinical language of scientific report as something they had not previously encountered in a single case. The theology was documented through the handwritten notebooks Wesson had filled over the decades, cramped, elaborate script on lined paper, page after page of the religion he had invented and imposed on his family in the dim, candlelit interiors of boats and houses and compounds across California. Jesus, the vampire. Blood as the path to eternal life. The Wesson family as God's chosen people, set apart from the corrupt world outside their curtained windows. Marcus as God himself, walking among them. The coffins were documented, photographed, examined. 10 white coffins purchased and stolen over years, present in every dwelling the family occupied, as unremarkable as furniture to the children who had grown up around them. The central question at Wesson's trial was, who had literally pulled the trigger? The .22 caliber handgun was found with the body of Wesson's 25-year-old daughter, Sabrina, who was the last to die, and her DNA was on the weapon. The defense argued that Sabrina had killed the others and then turned the gun on herself, that Marcus Wesson had not been the shooter. The prosecution argued that the distinction was meaningless. Whether his hand or his daughter's hand held the gun, those 9 people died because of what he had spent 30 years building, because of the coffins in the living room, because of the promises he had made. The jury deliberated in the cold fluorescent light of the jury room and returned their verdict on June 17, 2005. Guilty on all 9 counts of first-degree murder. Guilty on all 14 counts of rape and sexual molestation. The judge sentenced him to death in the hard light of that Fresno courtroom. He is alive. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a moratorium on executions in 2019. Marcus Wesson, 77 years old, lives at San Quentin Rehabilitation Center behind concrete walls and steel doors, in the dim gray institutional light of a California prison. He will never be eligible for parole. The survivors. Elizabeth, some of his daughters and sons, the women who had escaped, came out of the dim Wesson world into the hard, ordinary light of ordinary life and had to rebuild their understanding of reality from the ground up. Many of them, in the immediate aftermath, could not condemn him. That is the fact most difficult for people on the outside to understand. But when someone has been your God since before you could form independent thoughts, in the darkness and enclosure of a world that had no outside, when the white coffins in the living room were furniture, when the handwritten Bible was scripture, when the man with the blood on his hands was the center of your entire universe, the process of understanding that he was a monster is not instantaneous. With time, with distance, with support, many of them made the journey. Slowly, imperfectly, in the flat California light outside the curtained houses of their childhood, they rebuilt. The children in that back bedroom did not get to rebuild. The youngest was 18 months old. His name was Java. He was Marcus Wesson's son. He was also, by the biology of what Wesson had done to his own daughters, Marcus Wesson's grandson. He was 18 months old. He is 18 months old forever. The white coffins were removed from the Fulton Street house by investigators and logged as evidence. The house still stands on that flat Fresno street, in that flat Fresno neighborhood, under the hard white California sky. Its paint has faded further. Its windows are still dark. It looks like any other house on any other street. It keeps no visible record of what was inside it. The record exists in the court documents, in the DNA reports, in the testimony of the women who escaped and came back and knocked on a door in the morning sunlight, in the forensic photographs of that back bedroom taken in the cold white beam of police flashlights, in the words of the mayor who walked into that room and has never forgotten what he saw, and in the coffins. The 10 white coffins that sat in the living room for years, in plain sight, in the dim interior behind the dark curtains, while 9 children grew up sleeping on the floors around them, and learned, from the only God they had ever known, that death was not something to fear. What do you think? Is Marcus Wesson exactly where he belongs? Should California reinstate the death penalty for cases like his? Leave your verdict in the comments below. Subscribe to Family Crimes for a new case every week, because the darkest secrets hide at home.